All right, hello everyone. My name is Sergey. I'm presenting this paper on behalf of all of us. So Rostislav and Alexander are the two PhD students that work with Joy Paquet and Sudir Modur. And they did this work in big part as a part of this course with me. So the work is still ongoing. We are working to prepare and release data sets and enhanced results very soon as well. So, and publish it on GitHub. Okay, so we talk about a simulation environment where we make a virtual camera based on the OpenISS framework to simulate an IoT device. It actually can be a wrapper for the real device because OpenISS has a RESTful API. And we present two related papers in this conference as well, so make sure to check them out. And we look at this perspective, how can we protect this device, assuming it's insecure from the firmware perspective of view, or inability to administer it. Let's say you have a camera out there somewhere and it's not protected. So how can we monitor with that with an expensive solution that can help us mitigate security factors with this type of devices that are numerous. So we define a framework for this, how to do that. So the premise here and the challenge is that it's hard or almost impossible to maintain and update such systems that already known to be exploitable. Let's say if there are zero-day vulnerabilities or other things, other exploits published or unpublished. So, and it's hard to patch these things, especially for the legacy systems. Now, that's one thing. So we want to protect in this direction towards such cameras with something more maintainable and inexpensive. And as well as if assuming the camera, you have physical access, it's compromised and it start attacking some service from the camera, then we also want to block in the other direction as well. Why are we bother with this? Because a couple of years ago there was a massive denial of service attack by the compromised cameras on a Krebs on security website, and then there was another one that followed later. So this type of attacks, what we're looking towards maybe mitigating in both directions of the IoT devices with, let's say, by placing something like a Raspberry Pi, which is an inexpensive pocket-sized computer that we can run it on and then monitor the traffic using machine learning techniques or whatever heuristics to detect the bad traffic. So that's a design of Pi analyzer, how we call it. Pi is from the Raspberry Pi, and it's an analyzer to basically process the traffic. So the idea is to train on both ingress and egress traffic and take actions in either direction when you're protecting an IoT device in question, such as a camera. And there's been known attacks besides denial of service, such as eavesdropping, jamming, collision, replay, sinkhole, and others. So these attacks can be all covered in a framework if we get the proper data for them, which can be made available. So in this specific experiment, we focus on admin control type of traffic and behavior. That is when it changes. There are different ways of dealing with this, such as software-defined network, virtualization of network functions, and blockchains, and machine learning, and deep learning. So we use the application called MARV-PCAT for this to analyze the packet data. It supports multiple backends from MARV for machine learning that was arguably the first such a framework out there in the open source world. And also was used to analyze the packet captures a couple of years back. So, and it supports other backends as well. So this is a way of dealing with. So in this case, we have a REST API at the OpenISS camera. So it's a web service that can either be connected to an actual camera, let's say a sensor such as Kinect, or can replay a footage, a pre-recorded footage from another from an earlier camera recording using FakeNet just to test things. And it has a RESTful API attached to it, and then there's a client. So the idea here is that assuming this is the camera, which is an IoT device, it's insecure and it cannot be patched. So what we did, we instrumented this RESTful API to enable a login, like a fake login, and to sample that traffic of a fake login, and then enabled another component inside the web service. Is once the fake login is enabled, it starts sending traffic of the images it captures to a designated IP. And this type of traffic, that's what we analyze. So we mostly use the virtual camera for the software simulation, but as well as the physical one. And the normal operation of the RESTful API for OpenISS, we do not work with SOAP services, but mostly REST, because REST is most popular right now. So there are these calls through the URI using color, mix, or depth images. And we define this instrumented API for this project called login. So for simulation, to simulate if there is a login going on. Now, it's a post type of API that gives a login password and a host address. So this is a host address basically, which will supposedly be targeted after the IoT device is compromised. So the presence of this login call with an IP address is considered not normal. So we use JSON format to send that, to encode this data, and we get some return back. That doesn't really matter. So at the application side, which is a Java-based application that uses either Glassfish or Tomcat as a container, we have this instrumented call to handle this login, where it ignores the username and password because it's just to be there for completeness. But it takes this IP address that was also part of the submission, and then starts another module that starts sending the frames that are read to that IP address using UDP. So this is a little more details about the implementation of this method. So it's a post method for handling login, and then what kind of output it produces. So we actually separated normal or benign traffic and bad traffic into several categories, which are listed on the slide. So under normal operation, OpenISS, when you query it using RESTful API, it either gives you depth, color, a mix of the two. And we have a traffic when you send an admin, you log in, you basically use the login type of traffic. You can also direct a denial of service attack towards the normal camera using a ping, let's say a ping of death, like you fly it with ping requests. Or you can have a bad admin login, the one that has the IP address in it. And we have the sixth type of traffic is when the camera is presumed compromised and it starts attacking this target IP that we supplied in a bad admin login for denial of service. So what we've done, we recorded these data sets, so we plan to publish them as well sometime later after the conference. So we set up this architecture to basically capture hundreds or thousands of packets in either direction from the client, from the server side, and put them into categories, so we can do 10 cross-fold validation, split it 20 and 80 parts, and we have a library that can parse them, so it's a pickup files based on marv-pcat, and that's how the traffic metadata was organized. So this is for the machine learning component of it. So for every category, which is in this case whether it's a pure color image category, which is normal operation, it's a benign traffic, was in the set 8, which is on the client side. We had a corresponding one on the server side. So this is the dataset collection that we've been doing. And the CVE component is adopted from the marv-pcat common vulnerability enumeration category. It's not used as such in this experiment, but it supplies as a category. The rest of the information is less relevant, except just for internal machine learning purposes when we get an ID. So it's a supervised learning with a 10-fold cross-validation that we are working with to basically divide it into 10 parts, train on 9, test on 1, so and then change them randomly again, test, train and test. So that's how the architecture, ideally, so we take if you take a Raspberry Pi or a software device, we put this Spinalizer part on it. So we used actually IOS, which is a built-in router and firewall, and it has two interfaces. The one would connect to the camera on the right side and the other one to the internet. So this traffic sampling would be going, while it's allowed through in both directions, a copy of the traffic is sent to our tool that we're developing here called Spinalizer. And then this tool basically would check against the model that was pre-trained at the time of the deployment to see to detect one of the bad traffic types in either direction. So this is the components between the interfaces. We have these modules. So the firewall module is essentially there, and if the threshold, we have a certain threshold for the classifier part that it's exceeded, we then take an action on the firewall to block the traffic in either direction, one or line. So this is just sample examples of the firewall rules that are set up using IOS, as I mentioned. So this is scripted, and the output of the script is essentially waiting for the traffic. So normally the traffic is not delayed, it just led through, but the copy, as I said, is sent to the Spinalizer module, that if it detects, and only then it reacts. So we don't go all the time through it to Otherwise, that would increase latency and the normal operation, which is probably the majority of the traffic. But this type of rule that would be enabled if the condition is met, the threshold condition is met. So that inside Finalizer, there are several modules. We call them as a controller that basically manages all these things called, collector, classifiers, and change managers. So they have different function for collecting traffic samples and supplying these traffic samples with appropriate metadata to Finalizer classifier. And then actually doing the classification, and then you get a reply whether it's a bad or benign, and you take action if it's bad. So that's roughly the sequence between the collectors. So collectors act on both directions of the traffic, ingress and egress, and they store this traffic in a pickup files. So this is primarily when you need sample data. If the machine learning model is already deployed on something like small as a Pi, you would probably don't want to train, but it is possible to enable continual learning with this as well. It's a part of our future work. The classifier is essentially manages a collection of classifier. There is more than one. So we basically, during the training, we actually train multiple combinations to see which one gives us the fastest performance and accurate results. And then the classification itself is done during the change manager. So the classifier tells us traffic good or bad, we permit it or deny it, so we evoke the action. And at the same time, we log the evidence in forensic lucid format. So this is format that's used for digital investigation, digital crime investigation parts. So it has both the compile and a runtime system. So we prepare the logs directly in a compatible manner, so all the evidence is produced and can just go and compile it. So we have a similar talk related to this in this conference about JSON format encoding, but in this case we don't bother encoding because we produce it. And that's how the big picture where it all fits together. So I will ignore the HCI aspects of it, as well as the OpenISS human-computer interaction, but we use it as a virtual camera, which is connected to the network. And that's where the bottom middle Finalizer component comes in. It has a MarvPCAT application that could have different machine learning backends in this architecture, and then there is a thing called to update the firewall and sniff the traffic, which is the collection manager, and then you have this reasoner based on Gypsy. So the Gypsy part in this case would be the one compiling forensic lucid models, storing that appropriately, and then running, evaluating it. So this is our architecture. So we have some preliminary results that we produce. They're not ready for full publication yet, that we're going to produce very soon now. But the main contribution here is this architecture that can be used to deploy different type of similar solution for legacy or other IoT devices. And since it's a Raspberry Pi, it's a Linux-based OS. So, or ViOS is another Linux-based OS. It can be patched, updated, maintained in a big cycle as like maintenance cycle, like you would patch a server. So which makes it a lot more sustainable than exposing pure cameras or similar type of devices on the internet. So that's basically concludes this presentation. So stay tuned. We are gonna publish this on GitHub as well under gypsy-dev repository, as well as the OpenISS repository as one of the applications. And there's definitely going to be a follow-up work on this. Thank you very much.